Welcome classic rock fans to one of my ranking videos, worst to best so to speak. Today we're looking at the albums of Motorhead, 23 studio albums in total. If you haven't done already, please do take a moment to click like, subscribe and check that bell to get notified of any future uploads. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the work done here at Classic Album Review. It's always much appreciated. Trent Reznor said there's something strangely musical about noise, and he's absolutely spot on. This enigma we call Motorhead has been deafening audiences and killing lawns for generations now. Undoubtedly the dirtiest rock and roll band in history. So how would we rank their studio albums? I count about 23 of them. So let's start at the bottom, shall we? Number 23 is Overnight Sensation from 1996. This is the first album this band did after leaving Epic. The cover art is not fantastic. In fact, it's the first album since Ace of Spades to actually feature a cover shot of the band, Lemmy minus those trademark famous lamb chops of his. Also gone is the famous Motorhead mascot. Mickey D says it was a difficult album to make. The band, many of them unhappy with what they perceived to be a kind of a poppy direction that he felt Lemmy was trying to take the band in. That's the interview he gave for Ultimate Classic Rock. Nevertheless, it's, the whole thing does have a stripped down feel to it. You get Civil War, which is an interesting number. The acoustic driven Listen to Your Heart. You get Eat the Gun, a speed crazed rant. Lemmy's tongue firmly placed in cheek as usual. And I Don't Believe a Word, which is one of Lemmy's finest songs in my opinion. But overall I have to say this album is a miss for me. Number 22 is Snakebite Love from 1998. Obviously this album follows Overnight Sensation. It was an album done at speed, if you excuse the pun. It was an album that was generally rushed. The whole band felt they'd gone into the studio with nothing prepared. Unfortunately none of that paid off. Maybe they were hoping for some kind of spontaneity, but it just doesn't show on this one. Comes across as a bit of a mess, a melding of the classic Motorhead sound with other genres, believe it or not. I quite like Love for Sale, and the sound of the organ is quite interesting on this album as well. I think it's used in the track Take the Blame. Dead and Gone, which sounds like a Simon and Garfunkel track. That is after 20 years of smoking and necking Special Brew, of course. Ultimately, it's a pretty forgettable record. Number 21 is March or Die from 1992. Lemmy at the time was preoccupied with writing songs for Ozzy. He went on record as saying he made more money from those few Ozzy Osbourne songs he wrote than he ever made with anything from Motorhead. This album feels a little bit lackluster. The production especially feels weak on this one. There's a rather pointless rendition of Ted Nugent's Cat Scratch Fever. We do get some interesting guests on this album. I think Slash sticks his nose in on this one. And we do get the song Hellraiser, which was used in Hellraiser 3. I have to say it's a pretty mixed bag. A lot of the Motorhead numbers sound pretty uninspired. It seems that Ozzy got the best stuff here. Number 20 is 1916 from 1991. Another album that's a pretty mixed bag, really. I get the feeling the band were fatigued after their 2-year court battle with GWR. But it's an interesting album nonetheless, with the title track especially being one that stands out. A very sombre, acoustic-driven, funereal feel as Lemmy relates the tale of a young man marched off to war. Sounds almost as if he's drifting to heavy folk territory here, but this one is hardly Fairport Convention, I must say. The rest of the album is a typical Motorhead fare. We get tracks like I'm So Sad Baby I Don't Care, No Voices in the Sky with its infectious chorus. Not to mention this is the album that gives us the track Ramones, which is a song that featured in the band's set list right up to the last minute. Number 19 is On Parole from 1979. This is an unofficial release from the band, really. It was thrown out by their record company, I believe, to try and cling to the shirt tails of Bomber and Overkill, to try and cash in on that success, the initial success the band were having. It does include several versions of songs that made it onto the band's debut album, of course. Just a thoroughly intriguing Motorhead artifact as it regales us with a few recordings made by the original lineup of the band before Phil Taylor and Fast Eddie joined. We get Lost Johnny, of course, featuring Larry Wallace of the Pink Fairies on guitar and Lucas Fox on drums. An interesting curiosity, at least. Number 18 is Sacrifice from 1995. This is the last album of the band's quartet. Wurzel leaves during the sessions for this album. Now I must admit I have a soft spot for Wurzel. I saw Motorhead a couple of times with him thoroughly entrenched in the band. I thought he was excellent. This is a solid, but not a great album. A wonderful cover, I have to say, though. It has 3 great songs, namely Sex and Death Out of the Sun and the title track, as well as War for War is another one worth hearing. It has a distinctly grunge feel, if I may say so, and maybe that's down to the producer Howard Benson, who was keen to give it a very 1990s aesthetic. And the production emphasises the heaviness of the record, to the extent perhaps it's a little bit overdone in places. We do like Motorhead to be loud, aggressive rock and roll, but not to the extent where it becomes muddy, indistinct splurge. Just my own personal preference, I guess, there. Interesting, in 2011, Motorhead biographer Joel McIver wrote that The Sacrifice was exactly what you expect, a decent, if unspectacular, Motorhead record with a couple of classic songs here and there. Number 17 is We Are Motorhead from 2000. We Are Motorhead, born to kick your ass. Very much part of the band's manifesto. I think it's ingrained in granite. It starts off with that tsunami of drums from Mickey D with the track See Me Burning. The track is a rumbling onslaught for the ears. It's quite a thrilling listen, I have to say. It leaves you feeling like your head's been burgled. Slow Dancers and OK Blues Rock and Stay Out of Jail has a really, really great riff. Expectations were fairly high for this album, and I must admit I think the quality of the album slips a little bit after the tracks I've mentioned. I'm certainly not keen on the Sex Pistols cover either. Really, I heard one critic describe the Sex Pistols as the monkeys of punk. Personally, I don't think that song works for Motorhead. And number 16 is Hamad from 2002, an album that was recorded in the wake of the 9/11 catastrophe, which probably accounts for a lot of the social criticism on this record. I think Lemmy at one point opines in the song Brave New World, the Aldous Huxley title, if Jesus came back now, he'll be in jail by next week. Voices from the War is another one in a very similar vein. Guns N' Roses keyboardist Dizzy Reed also plays on the track Mine All Mine, which some critics have argued that sounds very similar to the track Rocket from the wonderful Another Perfect Day album from 1983. The album concludes with Serial Killer, which is like a spoken word monologue, Lemmy at his most hoarse. It also contains the song The Game. Now, The Game was actually composed by WWE composer, in-house composer, Jim Johnston. It was actually theme music for the wrestler Triple H, who actually insisted that the band record it. Number 15 is Rock and Roll from 1987. Now, this album came hard upon the heels of the Orgasmatron album, but this album is nowhere as good as the Orgasmatron record. Lemmy described it as a quick and dirty album simply titled Rock and Roll. Lemmy has always insisted that this is what epitomises Motorhead. We are Motorhead and we play rock and roll, he used to open the gigs with. Phil Taylor's back for this one, although his drumming I don't think is up to speed compared to it was on the earlier albums. This album does boast the cannibalistic delight that is Eat the Rich. It is a biting, no pun intended, acerbic, genuinely witty song really, which showcases I think how clever a songwriter Lemmy could be. I must admit I love the idea of kind of greed consuming itself. One critic has written, turning cannibalism and class warfare into sexual metaphors is quite an interesting idea. Other tracks that have got an interesting groove on this record, some are an outright oral assault like Dogs and Traitor. All For You displays a tenderness in its message, actually revealing what as I've said, what a nuanced songwriter Lemmy can actually be. The Wolf is a ferocious number on an album that I would describe as kind of half solid and half flabby, so to speak. Number 14 is Aftershock from 2013. Some critics argue that Motorhead just churned out albums. I think it's very safe to say they had a pretty good formula and they stuck with it. This album is said to be one of the weakest of their later albums. I don't agree, it has some good stuff on it personally. I mean, some of the lyrics do come across as a little bit half-arsed. I mean, for example, make it quick, the coup de grace, makes you dead, kills your arse. Half-arsed lyrics personally, and I think Motorhead's songwriting and performance is much better when they give it the full arse. There's some surprisingly good stuff on here as well as Lost Wind Blues, a sleazy, slow-crawling, moody number. We can just imagine Lemmy sneering into his downturned mic, his mutton chops and moles, and not to mention that wonderful vintage Rickenbacker bass that thunders all the way across this album. This is a 21st Motorhead album. It's not a bad album at all, to be honest with you. It certainly takes pride of place on my shelf. Number 13 is Bastards from 2013. This is a stripped down, gritty and punishingly loud album. I mean, we wouldn't expect anything less. With one exception, of course, Don't Let Daddy Kiss Me, which is one that deals with the rather disturbing topic of child abuse. This album was released on the German label XYZ, and there's some really, really good songs on this one. This is the last album to feature Phil Taylor, I believe. I think he quits during this album. I hope I got my facts right. But it does feature Phil Campbell, Lemmy Wurzel and Mickey D. I really loved that access, that guitar access of Phil Campbell and Wurzel. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. I loved the sound of the band during this time. I went to see them on the 10th anniversary tour. They were supported by Wendy O. Williams, believe it or not, and I think it was Zodiac Mind Warp and the Love Reaction. Is that what they were called? I can't really remember, but what a great show that was. They just put out the No Remorse album, I think. Killed by Death as well was the hot single from this band at the time. And I think Orgasmatron happens to be one of their finest albums, but we'll come on to that a bit later. Anyway, this album starts off strong with On Your Feet or On Your Knees, Burner, Death or Glory and I Am the Sword, which follows a very similar sort of Motorhead formula. If it ain't broke, I wouldn't dream of fixing it type attitude. I Am the Sword is a very twisting and memorable riff. Death or Glory is like a metal avalanche, as Burner is an incendiary number. And things slow down, of course, on the track Don't Let Daddy Kiss Me. It's a slow one, as I've said, that deals with a rather disturbing topic. Bad Woman is rock and roll Motorhead style. It has the piano stylings of Jerry Lee Lewis all the way through this. Jerry Lee Lewis, of course, was one of Lemmy's heroes. The clunkers on this album are Lost in the Ozone, I'm Your Man, and We Bring the Shake. This album was actually produced by Howard Benson, who worked with Bon Jovi, Theory of a Dead Man, and Creed, which accounts for the overall sound and production aesthetic on this record. Number 12 is Bad Magic from 2015. This album took me by surprise, to be honest with you. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. It opens with a thrashing Victory or Die, which is followed by the amped up Thunder and Lightning. Firestorm Hotel has very much the Ted Nugent vibe to it. And we really get that classic Motorhead sound on The Devil with its familiar rumble and Lemmy's tubercular growl. The album even boasts a guest appearance of Brian May, believe it or not. It's interesting how, in what high esteem Motorhead were held by the music community, specifically Lemmy, I think. Evil Eye is one of my favourites on this album. It's like Motorhead meets Venturas with Lemmy's demonic growl all the way through it. Till the End is a track I tend to skip, to be honest with you, but I rather like the Alice Cooper, like Choking on Your Screams. Well, that is Alice Cooper minus the high camp, so to speak. Also, we get the cover of the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil, which I rather wish they hadn't done that. It's just one of those songs that should be left alone, personally. The original, of course, has an unnerving and fraught atmosphere and is imbued with Jagger's presence, swagger and charm. But overall, not a bad album to go out on, I think. Number 11 is Kiss of Death from 2006. This is the album that follows Inferno, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Inferno was a strong album, in my opinion. And this is the second album produced by Cameron Webb, which accounts for its overall production style and sound and vibe that comes across on this record. Tracks on here that are not so great, tracks like Christine and One Night Stand, but these don't drag the album down too much as it's buoyed by the greatness of some of its heavier numbers like Sucker, Sword of Glory, Living in the Past and Kingdom of the Worm. There are some notable guest appearances on this record as well, namely Poison's guitarist CeCe DeVille plays on God Was Never on Your Side, and Alice in Chains' bassist Mike Inez adds ballast to Under the Gun. Although I have to say God Was Never on Your Side very much feels like a reworking of I Don't Believe a Word from 1996's Overnight Sensation. Number 10 is Motorizer from 2008. A strong album with some ferocious stomping numbers on this one. Some blues inflections, but essentially the kind of dirty rock and roll we'd come to expect from Motorhead. We get the mid-tempo One Short Life, one of Lemmy's philosophical life songs, shall we say, and the anti-war When the Eagle Screams. But I think on this album the faster tracks are the real gems. You know, tracks like Runaround Man and Rock Out. I think Rock Out was a single, if I'm not mistaken. We get some punchy, even punky numbers on this record. I must admit, Lemmy's voice sounds absolutely remarkably good on this album. A bit like Tom Waits gargling with sand, that trademark Marlboro rasp is in full vigour here. The album does drop off a bit, I think, with the tracks English Rose and Back on the Chain, but the closing number, The Thousand Names of God, is a moody anti-war number that Lemmy does so well. It really lends this album an anthemic buzz. A strong effort and a great later album resurgence from this band. It really does grow on you, and some of the nuances, and yes, believe it or not, I'm actually using the word nuances in conjunction with Motorhead's music, are really revealed on this one. Number 9 is The World Is Yours from 2010. This is the 20th Motorhead studio album, believe it or not. It's produced by Cameron Webb, and I have to say I think the production really breathes life into the Lemmy numbers on this one. Lemmy's songwriting really shines through here. It's a real treat to listen to. The standout tracks on this album are Born to Lose, Know How to Die and Get Back in Line, and The Devil's in My Head. Great crunching metallic riffs, a perfect platform for Lemmy's pithy and witty lyrics. Rock and roll music is not such a great number on this one, with a pretty naff chorus, but the album really picks up with Waiting for the Snake Outlaw. This has to be said, this is a great later period album. Not as good as Inferno in my opinion, but it's pretty damn good nonetheless. Number 8 is Motorhead from 1977. Their self-titled album, released on the Chiswick label, of course, in 1977, is recognised as officially being the first Motorhead album, although On Parole was actually recorded before this. It's certainly the first album to feature that classic trio of Lemmy, Fast Eddie and Phil Taylor. This album was appropriately recorded at breakneck speed. The band almost split up, I think, during the sessions, or the recording sessions. The sessions were actually salvaged, or the album was salvaged by the label head, Ted Carroll, who was sufficiently pleased with the sessions to bankroll the rest of the record. It's an album that features 3 Hawkwind numbers, namely Motorhead, Lost Johnny and The Watcher, as well as the blues number, The Train Kept A-Rolling. We get the very punky vibrator on this, as well as that biker's anthem, Iron Horse Born to Lose. And Lemmy's vocals are quite interesting on this. He hasn't fully utilised that Marlboro rasp yet, and we get a kind of a clean sounding Lemmy, believe it or not. The sleeve artwork, of course, features that famous war pig or snaggletooth, or whatever you want to call him, designed by artist Joe Patagno, who actually worked for Hypnosis, I believe, under Storm Thorgerson. Apparently he was certainly instrumental in the designing of the famous Led Zeppelin Swan Song logo. Apparently the original, according to Wikipedia, the original cover of the Motorhead logo had a spike and a swastika on it, but that was removed from subsequent editions. Number 7 is Iron Fist from 1982. This album is the last gasp of that classic Motorhead trio. It's an album that's not well thought of by the band or fans alike, and it tends to feature fairly low in these sort of ranking videos, but you know what, I rather like it. They started off working with Vic Marley, I think his name is, whose work on Ace of Spades is absolutely excellent, by the way, but he quits halfway through, and then Fast Eddie takes over the production details. It was a bit of a mess overall, this album. I mean, the title track is fantastic, I have to say. The whole thing has a done-on-the-fly feel to it. Apart from the title track, other tracks that are definitely worth listening to. Go to Hell is one of my favourites. Don't Need Religion, one of the many anti-religious rants that Lemmy would embark on during his career with Motorhead. And of course the aforementioned title track, which would often feature in the band's live set right up to their last days. It was released in April 1982 on May 14th. Clark left the band. Motorhead took exactly 1 week off in order to audition and find a replacement for Fast Eddie, which of course came in the guise of Brian Robertson, from formerly of Thin Lizzy. There was a promotional film made to promote the album, I think to the title track if I'm not mistaken. Lemmy says it had them prancing around all in leather armour and broadswords, dressed up like idiots in the woods in South Mims. Despite this album's rather low ranking in a lot of these videos, I rank it quite highly, as I have a bit of a soft spot for it. Number 6 is Another Perfect Day from 1983. An album often dissed by Motorhead fans, and the one following, of course, Fast Eddie's departure and the inclusion of ex-Thin Lizzy guitarist Brian Robertson. In my opinion, this is Brian Robertson was a much more technically accomplished player than Fast Eddie, and there's no doubt he changed the feel and vibe of Motorhead when he joined. For better or for worse, well, I'll leave it up to the ear of the beholder. But I think personally this album is a much misunderstood and much maligned album. I also think Another Perfect Day brings a new melodicism to Motorhead. I almost feel like lowering my voice when I use the word melodicism in conjunction with Motorhead. Great songs like Back at the Funny Farm, which amuses me with Lemmy's very pithy and acerbic lyrics, for example. What Was That Injection, because I think it's going wrong. I really like this jacket, but the sleeves are much too long. Shine and Dancing on Your Grave are great numbers. Dancing on Your Grave is one of my favourite Motorhead songs of all time. It's built around that beautiful, beautiful riff. Could easily be considered FM radio fare as far as I'm concerned. Rocket incorporates some boogie woogie piano, and One Track Mind is one of the group's best sleazy blues efforts. And that's before we get one of Lemmy's anti-war diatribes, Tales of Glory. The production on this album is sharp, it's powerful. It's, especially compared to the last record, Another Perfect Day has to be, in my opinion, one of Motorhead's most underrated albums. In fact, AllMusic has said it's one of their most unique, albeit misunderstood, albums in the entire Motorhead catalogue. Number 5 is Inferno from 2004. This is a real resurgence from Motorhead. It's one of the best latter-day albums. The first, I believe, to be produced by Cameron Webb. Has a superb cover as well, which speaks volumes in terms of the incendiary music contained thereon. It blazes away from the opening note with that expected Motorhead thunder. Plenty of raw rock and roll muscle on here, plus there's a few songs here that seem to edge towards what I would call sonic exploration. The opening track really sets the tone for this one. The smoulderingly good Terminal Show Killers, and In the Name of Tragedy. 3 numbers to really loosen the fillings. Ferocious yet hard grooving numbers. Has to be said that Mickey and Lemmy are incredible in laying down a driving rhythm for a lot of these tracks. At times this feels like sonic abuse. And Phil Campbell's guitars are absolutely brutal. I love the guitar bit in the middle of Terminal Show. It's a squealing and squiggling eruption. It's very Zappa-esque. And this guitar solo comes courtesy of Steve Vai. This album is absolutely packed with Motorhead goodness. It's fast, furious and infamous. Passion, energy and great choruses, but in the spirit of what I would call sonic eclecticism. We get some structurally intriguing numbers like Fight and In the Year of the Wolf. We also get the acoustic whorehouse blues. This album is a combustible, creative resurgence for this band. It's been described by Guy Strachan in Terrorizer magazine as the best album that Motorhead have ever recorded. Number 4 is Bomber from 1979, an album recorded only 6 months after the Overkill album. Although it doesn't quite hit the same mark in the way that Overkill did. Of course, on this album they had to deal very much with Jimmy Miller's as a problematic producer due to his substance addiction. Nevertheless, they produced a damn good album. It's fierce, it's vitriolic, with some of Lemmy's best songwriting. His lyrics here are sharp, acerbic observations as he takes on numerous social ills. For example, All the Aces rants against the injustices of the music industry and how the artist doesn't stand a chance. Welcome to the Machine, indeed. In one song he attacks the vapidness and triteness of TV. And of course, Dead Man Tell No Tales, a diatribe against heroin. With Jimmy Miller in the throes of heroin addiction, the irony was laid on thick here. Lots of songs have some intriguing psychological depth. A song like Poison, for example. As on previous albums, Bomber is a mixture of slow and fast numbers. You get tracks like Lawman and Sweet Revenge that fans the embers rather than stokes the flame, so to speak. Step Down is Eddie Clarke's first lead vocal. Apparently Fast Eddie was somewhat irked that Lemmy was getting all the media attention, so Lemmy threw the microphone over to him for that one. The album's highlight is Stone Dead Forever, with the track stretched out with multiple guitar parts and some wonderful bass from Lemmy. Great interplay between the two. This is a top shelf Motorhead album as far as I'm concerned. Number 3 is Orgasmatron from 1986. It was 3 years between Another Perfect Day and the recording of this album. Of course, I think they'd left the Bronze label and formed their own new label, GWR, means Great Western Road, I think, where the offices were actually situated. There was that compilation album that came out in between those albums, No Remorse, which I had on a nice leather sleeve, if my memory serves me right. Nevertheless, after leaving Bronze, the band was somewhat itinerant, so to speak. In fact, in Joe McIver's book, Lemmy says, Elektra passed, MCA passed, Epic passed, CBS passed, Chrysalis passed, everyone passed. But as I said, eventually the management set up their own label, GWR. The album was recorded in London and then mixed in New York. Bill Laswell was behind the desk. It's a fine album. I saw them on this tour. You get tracks like Death Forever, the single, Mean Machine, Ain't My Crime, The Claw, and of course that immortal and menacing title track. What really lets this album down is its production, which is a bit of a strange one really, because the band were happy with Laswell. He'd produced the Ramones, he'd produced Iggy Pop, and his production really emphasises those almost semi-industrial sound of buzzsaw guitars and the thundering drums. They were really happy with the whole thing. After he came back from New York, he came back with what has been described as a sonic sludge. In his autobiography, White Line Fever, Lemmy states that, as it turned out, Bill was good for getting sounds, but he fucked everything up in the mix. It was a much better album when he took it to New York than when he brought it back. It was dreadful. Orgasmatron was mud. Even Phil Campbell says they produced a fine album, but unfortunately was let down by the production. Number 2 is Ace of Spades from 1980, produced by Vic Marley, who worked with bands ranging from The Who to Dr. Feelgood. The album has a very clean and stripped down feel to it. I really love the sound of this album. It's one of those albums where everything just comes together perfectly, and the band's power really comes across in this almost western themed metal foray, with its unified threads of desperados, gunslingers, gambling. Its impact, its visceral impact and visual impact is immediately apparent. Ace of Spades is the one Motorhead song everybody knows. Of course, it kicks off this album. This album is probably the peak of their early career in terms of material and sound. And like the other albums, you get a nice mix of slow and fast numbers with the emphasis on speed. Pun intended. You get tracks like Shoot You in the Back is a great mid-tempo one, and The Chase is better than The Catch, often introduced by Lemmy live in concert as The Face is juicier than The Snatch. That of course is a slower bluesy number. The Hammer, which is a song very much dedicated to Phil Taylor, is a feral number. But the production on this album is absolutely first class, and I love the way that Lemmy's bass is emphasised in the mix. His bass really dominates the proceedings here and was giving Fast Eddie a run for his money. Check out Love Me Like a Reptile, which is probably my favourite track on this album. Lemmy's bass on that one is absolutely monolithic. The Sleeve is so rock and roll, each of them portraying a different type of Western protagonist, of course. Eddie was based on Clint Eastwood's character, the Man with No Name from those Sergio Leone westerns. Phil's costume was based on Marlon Brando's character in One-Eyed Jack, and Lemmy's costume was claimed by Phil to be inspired by Brett Maverick from the TV show Maverick. All photographed in the wild, wild west, of course, those untamed badlands of Barnet. A truly legendary album, there's no doubt about that. And number 1 on my list is Overkill from 1979. Overkill has a raucous edge and juxtaposes that metallic crunch and thunder of the title track against the sharper, more acerbic, we could even say punkier numbers like No Class, Stay Clean, I Won't Pay Your Price and Tear You Down. The band's more spacier, Hawkwind-esque numbers are still apparent here. There we go. Of course, we get Capricorn and Metropolis on this album. Of course, leaving the Chiswick label, they'd actually had a hit with Louis Louis, which secured them a spot on Top of the Pops. And it's about this time they start working with producer Jimmy Miller, who is famed for, shall we say, corralling out-of-control types. He famously worked with the Rolling Stones, who reference him in their anthemic and beautiful You Can't Always Get What You Want from the Let It Bleed album. Overkill was a successful album in many respects. It got to number 24 in the UK charts. Described by AllMusic as the landmark second album and a major leap forward for the band. And it's certainly a fierce album, showcasing Motorhead's penchant for their unapologetic proto-thrash. They moved forward, adopting a hybrid sound of punk-inflected heavy metal, a style that's been criticised for being raw and sloppy, but nevertheless incredibly powerful. In 2005, this album was rated in the Rock Hard magazine's book of 500 greatest rock and metal albums of all time. They rated it at a lowly 340, should have been much higher in my opinion. Joel McIver describes this album as a revelation. It's an album that contains 6 Motorhead classic numbers, which are pretty much guaranteed to make their way into their set list, even right up to the very end. This album, in my opinion, is undeniably their best. Anyway, you've been watching a ranking video, worst to best, of all the Motorhead studio albums. I hope you've enjoyed the show. So it just leaves me to say I hope you're all well, staying safe, enjoying the summer, but more importantly that you keep listening.